So, well, thank you so much for being here with me on the podcast today. So I've got Amanda Jolley, and she's a good friend and an awesome artist. And I'm just so excited that you agreed to be here with me today. So, um, anyway,
The
so
feeling's mutual. So
well, good. I mean, it's been more than 2 years
yeah,
since we saw each other. Whenever I came out to your studio and did my workshop out there, so um, I've been really enjoying following along and watching all of your adventures on Facebook and such. So I'm
well,
glad that you're
great.
here.
Thank you.
So um, anyway, so this is my podcast. Artistic Accomplices is all about just trying to encourage each other and kind of, I guess, be that like voice of encouragement. And I think that a lot of people get stuff through our stories, that they connect and we inspire people through our stories. So
Yeah.
thought we could start off with, well, what's your story? How did you end up here where you are now?
Uh, Started way back in Western Kansas in the dusty trails. But actually, I was raised in a small town and didn't even really consider myself artistic, even though I liked doing a lot of creative things. I loved music and writing and dancing and uh, really wanted to learn art, but really didn't have a good opportunity for that. And so I ended up becoming an accountant in college. And that didn't take very long in the real world for me to realize that it wasn't making me thrive. So I started playing again, and I think play is where the art bloomed. So yeah, I just kept trying different things until I found what really felt true, which has been paper and beeswax. So yeah.
Oh, good, good. Well, we'll get to the paper and the beeswax in a little bit, but I'm really interested in that kind of that early part of your journey, like when you were an accountant and you decided like, okay, this isn't filling my soul like it should, and like you said,
Yeah.
you weren't thriving. So how did you kind of make that transition from accountant to into the art? You said you were like playing around, but what was that kind of journey like for you, that part of the journey for you, like?
Oh, well, it was a lot of experimentation. Something I've always been drawn to is paper. And so my real, I would say, painting experience began with the visual journaling movement, which you know very well. So, so that's really what gave me my first outlet into painting and expressing. And I also love writing. So I found the book or altered book or journaling aspect, art journaling aspect, to be something that I could let both of the color and the shape and the words, let them all free. And it was really very healing for me. I hadn't realized how much of my true self I had been suppressing to fit this successful world that I thought I needed to be a certain type of person, especially as a woman. I think in the decades that I grew up, women were becoming more prominent in the workforce, but it was a weird thing. Like it was almost like you had to give up uh, whoever you were to be able to enter a masculine workforce. And
Mm.
so it was a bizarre untwisting of all of that too.
And I heard you say in another podcast that the journal for you was really kind of a place for you that helped you process stuff. So I guess I imagine that's part of that healing process that you were talking about.
Yes. So as I've mentioned, I love to write. I'll keep saying that because writing is part of my daily process, even now. But with the art journaling, I would often write some really vulnerable things on my pages, and then I just paint over them, or I'd collage over the top of them. And so I can go back to those pages now and remember not the exact words, but what I was feeling at that time or what I was working through. And it's still very powerful. stuff. I love those old journals. And yeah, they were totally used to help me find myself again.
Yeah, journaling I think is a very powerful thing. Like you said, I know all about that world, and uh, I'm like you. When I go back and look at my journals, I'm like, wow, this. Like you said, you might not remember exactly what you were writing, especially
Hmm.
because I've obscured some of my writing, maybe not to the extent that perhaps you have, but um, it's like I can remember like what I was feeling, like what was going on in my life. And I think that connecting that the written language with the visual language helps our memory so much. And here recently, I've been flipping back through some of my old journals, and it's just like, wow. And sometimes you forget about things, and you're
Right.
like, or you
You
discover. Oh, go ahead.
you recently posted a video of one of your old journals. I just really immensely enjoyed that. Yeah, I was so glad you did that.
Yeah, and you see things in there and you're like, why am I not still doing that? Like what happened that I'm not like using those images or those colors or those words or whatever. So it's really they're a great document of of what we're going through and what we're processing and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So besides the journaling, what else were you experimenting with? Because you said you were playing around with a lot of different things.
Uh, Soap making was one of them. I enjoy cooking. So I like started with soap making, and I got into fermenting foods. A lot of it was food based. I'm really not a good cook, and I really don't cook much now, but it was still part of that, just trying things.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it wasn't necessarily even art based, but it was a place to just explore and find out what I did like.
Yeah.
And I also, when I've played the piano most of my life, and when I was working as an accountant, I had stopped, and so I started doing that again when I quit my formal career, and it was also very life-giving. And but now that I paint so much, I really find that I'm not on the piano as much. It's like as long as I have the outlet, I'm good. But it having that there was
Yeah.
wonderful.
Well, that's good. What was that like making that decision? Like, okay, I can support, I can, make money being an accountant, and then all of a sudden saying, okay, I'm going to switch careers and go into this very unknown world. What was that transition like for you?
It was interesting, and so I came up with a plan B, which was ridiculous, and it didn't last very long. But um, to be able to give up that career, I still had to have some money coming in. So I sold Tupperware for for a little while. It didn't last very long at all. I was like, oh my goodness. But it was scary because, but I also knew I couldn't do that. I couldn't go to the office anymore and sit in this room and sit in front of a computer all day. I just couldn't do it. And I had to make some sort of change. So even the Tupperware was better for me um, than the office environment. Although I was working for a great company and all of that, and I could have kept climbing the ladder. Yeah, I just couldn't do it internally anymore. You have to do who you are.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I've talked on the podcast and other places about my transition from teaching. I was teaching art, but it just teaching in public schools is so different from the teaching that I'm doing now. And
yeah.
when I was going to work, being miserable and I was angry all the time, I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. And yeah, it was definitely
Yeah.
kind of scary. Um, and that was in the mid '90s that you made that
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah, I think I sold Tupperware for like 2 years, maybe 97, 98. And
Yeah.
then after that, I did do a part-time bookkeeping job for a couple years, and did some piecemeal sort of work like that just to keep a steady income coming in. But beyond that, well, I also had two children at home, so it was a lot of play with them and a lot of journaling. Yeah, a lot of art journaling. So.
Good. So you're talking about having two kids. So I can imagine that support from your families had to be very important at that time.
Oh yes, yeah. It was, and I think for Scott, my husband, who is an amazing guy, which you know,
Yeah.
um, it was pretty scary too because we had to rely on his income when I gave up that career. But we quickly figured out that a healthier me is so much better to be around, even with less
Yeah.
than, yeah.
Yeah, when I got out of teaching, my wife was very supportive because she had done something similar. She was a teacher, and that's how we met. And she got to the point in her teaching career where she was miserable,
Yeah.
and this was right when we first met, and she transitioned out. So whenever I said, "Okay, I want out," she was like totally understood because she had been there herself. So I think
Yes.
having that support. I think if you were in a relationship where your significant other doesn't quite understand, like, well, wait a minute, you're going to leave this job that's secure and you're making money to go do this thing that you're not sure of.
Right.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that would be like very freaked out by that.
Yeah. That's where the Tupperware came in.
Yeah. Oh, when I made that decision, I told my wife, I said, well, I'll try it out and I can always go back to teaching.
Right.
And that's something that still kind of, is in the back of my head, like if I had to, but I don't want to. There's,
I don't want
I,
to
I don't
either.
want to go back. So, um,
Yeah.
okay. So you were playing around with or exploring soap making and food stuff, and what other
Mhm.
things that were you kind of uh, playing around with? And I know that you would go and take classes a lot.
Well, I first started taking classes, and this was a big leap for me too. I like to actually spend money on myself in an area that I had no background or training or anything like that. So I started going to Art Fest in Port Townsend, Washington. And that was like my first venture into taking workshops from other people. And that was pretty life changing for me. I just realized so much more that was out there that I could dig into and try. And Art Fest was wonderful in that it had so many different options. So I could take a different workshop every day, try a totally different medium every day. And so I went to that until it ended. Um, and and that's where I actually learned encaustic painting. So it was like once I did that, it really was like, oh, this is so satisfying. I have to dive into this. So yeah.
So what was it about encaustic that just grabbed you, like that said, okay, this is what I I want to do.
I think that a big part of it is that it is so organic. It is so from the earth, and it feels like a gift from the earth. Um, since it's beeswax and caustic has a little bit of damar resin, which is a tree resin, so which also from the earth. The brushes I use are hog's hair or natural bristle. And I mean, everything is from the earth. So I feel like I'm not creating something that will not be able to decompose one day and go back to where it came from. So I really love that aspect from it. I have a really strong tie with nature. So, and it smells amazing. Yeah, and also it has sculptural qualities to it. So you paint with it hot, and as it cools, you can carve into it um, and use it in so many different forms. I found that it works well with a lot of the other uh, types of art that I was trying. So it's fun to play with. It. I love origami, and found a way to really marry it with the origami as well. So yeah.
That kind of leads us into the next thing about, let's talk about your origami. Um, in the one podcast I was listening to, you talked about being a little girl and somebody teaching you how to do origami.
Yeah, and that memory, uh, I did a show a couple years ago called Paper Memory, and it was pretty much about that experience with sitting with this she was like a grandmother figure to me, and my mom played the organ at church, so I would sit with her, and to keep me quiet, she taught me how to fold paper boats out of the bulletins at church. And just that memory of nurturing and care that she had for me, uh, whenever I fold paper now, it's so strong. It's like it's a visceral experience to fold paper for me, and it feels caring and loving. So just expanding into that. And so paper memory was about the creases that I make in the paper. Like if I unfold the paper, there's a crease line there, and the paper has that memory. And I likened it to my brain has that memory. It will never go away of the moments that I had with this woman teaching me to be quiet in such a loving way.
There's I like that, but being quiet, kind of, and the way you were talking about origami makes me think of this notion of mindful. It seems like such a mindful
Yes,
practice,
it is
especially
like meditation. Yeah.
I'll say, especially some of those very complex tessellation folds that you've done.
And
I,
those can take hours, so it's like a 5-hour meditation. So
yeah.
it's really a beautiful thing. And then to get to the end and have um this gorgeous object from that time is delightful.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the origami stuff on your website, and you were talking about unfolding the pieces and the creases. Um, it seems like such a I mean, they just remind me of drawings. It's like you're drawing with the folds, and it's just
Right.
they're very unique, and they look, like you said, like just the way the shadows and such with the paper looks. Yeah, it's like you think of it like origami. Okay, you make the boat, you make the swan, you make this thing, and then but you're like, no, you make it and then you unmake it.
Yes. And actually, I've been burning some lately. This year has been a year of lighting things on fire. And so I've been putting some tessellations I have embedded in wax and lit on fire this year. And the forms and the lines that come through on that are pretty incredible too. So yeah, I don't know what it is about the destruction of something so beautiful, but I think it's like letting go of the preciousness of the object. and and this seems to be a time where everything is somehow getting crumbled and destroyed, so
Yeah,
it's also kind of a picture of rebirth to me, that there's beauty that's going to come out of all of this.
yeah. Um, so how? I mean, so you were doing origami since you were young. Uh, you say you were like you did other kind of crafty or creative things when you were little. Were you into like art and drawing and stuff, or were you just like focused on the piano?
uh, I have some old stories, illustrated stories that I wrote. I love to write then too, so they're ridiculous. They're hilarious. The imagination was strong, but it's really fun to go back and look at those. And I have them like in a binder with stickers all over it, and yeah, it's pretty fabulous. So I did love to do stuff like that. Yeah, I I often wonder what would happen had I had like a strong art teacher in my small town to learn from.
Yeah.
What direction would I have gone? But absolutely loved all sorts of things. I loved coloring and yeah, storytelling. Narrative is even strong with the paper folding. It's like I find story in shapes, and finding that deeper meaning within things.
So that kind of leads me like that idea of story. That word has been coming up so much in everything that I've been doing, reading, writing. Things that I'm writing myself. But that notion of story, and I think now more than ever, that's a very important concept. Um, so how do you come up with your ideas? Because I think that's the question I get asked a lot by people, is sort of like, well, how do you come up with your ideas for your art? Where does that come from? And you can kind of say like, oh, well, it's like I'm trying to tell stories, but I don't know. I'm just trying to, I don't know. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. Yeah. I think that I've just continued from those art journal days when I was working through things. So I let a lot of childhood story or narrative that I was supposed to believe and was deconstructing come out on those pages, and really learned to listen to an inner voice. And so now I am just trying to be really careful to pay attention to what's attracting my attention. So, and kind of excavating that. I have a fascination with buffaloes right now, and I don't know what it's about. And so I'm going to dig into this story, or this idea, and find out what's going on with that. So I think that our whole lives, like, we are part of a story, and we listen to one another's stories, and we listen to the myths of our culture being passed down. And yeah, I think it's just a part of our inherent being as human beings, just to tell story, and to communicate truths through the story, I think. So as I'm discovering these truths for myself, I try to communicate them through my work.
Mm-hmm. So buffaloes, huh?
Yeah, I don't know why, but I even have a buffalo painted on my studio,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I had to have that, and so I'm digging into that right now. We'll
Was that,
find out.
do you recall like a moment where you're just like, ooh, buffaloes, or was this just something that like creeped up on you?
It creeped up on me totally. I folded a buffalo, fell in love with that. But I was at a restaurant with a buffalo head on the wall, and I'm like, oh, I love that. And one of those bizarre things. I'm not really a trophy head kind of person, but there was something about that buffalo. So it just keeps coming up again and again. So there's something there.
Yeah, I think part of being an artist is paying attention to those things that come up again and again. And like you said, like trying to figure out like, well, why? What is it about this thing that is drawing me in?
Right.
And and I just sometimes I feel like artists that are starting out have a hard time because they don't have that experience, and so they rely a lot on other people telling them like what to make and how to make it, and it's trying to get them to understand like, well, you have a story, you have ideas, it's just a matter of how you can access them.
And trusting yourself that your stories are actually just as relevant as other people's stories.
Hmm.
Yes, part of my burning process has actually been letting go of there. I think there, even in the art world, there were a lot of things that I clung to because I don't have an art degree.
Hmm.
So I would listen to what other people's ideas of what success as an artist meant, and I'm finding them, especially during this really quiet time while we're all staying at home, that those aren't necessarily true for me. And one thing that I've struggled with is production. I'm
Hmm.
not a prolific artist, and that's one thing I feel like I really don't anymore, but I really felt like I should be a prolific artist. I have the time and the space and the resources, but have found that it's really important for me personally, to have space in
Hmm.
between my work, because a lot of that work does come from story. So the story has to develop within me to be able to be expressed, and I can't just keep throwing it out
Yeah.
somehow.
Well, and I think if you get so caught up in the making that you don't, like you said, you don't leave space. You don't have that space for that other story, that those other ideas to come in. It's like you focus on that one thing so much that you have blinders on, and
Right.
nothing else can kind of come in.
Yeah. And I was sort of beating myself up too, like, the whole I'm a loser because I'm not producing, and my
Yeah.
goal is to produce, and it's like, why is that my goal? So that's another thing I've been burning in the studio.
What, your goals
Things,
or?
other people's goals that I thought should be mine.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think burning is such a release. It's a great way to let go. And when I left teaching, I took a bunch of stuff that I had, project examples, things from college. I put them in my fire pit and I burned them, just to kind of,
Wow.
just to like be like, okay, I'm done with that era of my life. Now let me move on. I think fire is very symbolic. It's
Yeah.
cleansing in lots of ways. So,
Yes.
um,
I bet that felt really good.
and I've done it on other occasions. I was going through my studio and I found like just a bunch of old artwork that I'm just like, I don't even want this around anymore. I just need to let this go, so that kind of make room for the new stuff. Cause I felt like a lot of things were like cluttering around me, and that there was so much
Mm.
clutter. And I've had periods in my art making where I've been very prolific. And so I have all this stuff and it's just sort of like, okay, it's just sitting here. Like, no one's bought it. It's been here for years. I don't really want it anymore. I can't think of anything to do with it. And I'm like, well, let's just burn it. Let's get rid of it. Let's let go of it. So, yeah, there's something about fire that
There
is.
is. Yeah, I'm digging it. It's my new medium.
But you're using it with the origami, and you're using it with the encaustic.
Yes, and I also recently received a gift from a neighbor of Greek Orthodox prayer candles.
Hmm,
So these are expired candles. They're just little nubs, and a lot of them are still stuck in the sand.
hmm.
And so I've just been piling them up and just setting them on fire, and it's such a blast because they're 100% beeswax. So it's I'm still there with my earth element,
Yeah.
and it that smells really good, and it's really cathartic to light them on fire, and then finding myself throwing other things in there in the
Hmm.
fire that represent whatever else that needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been really digging what you've been doing lately, because it seems like you've gone back, like with using those candles and going back more to just the natural beeswax.
Hmm.
And I know some of your other art, you're using the pigmented wax
Right. Yeah.
to paint with and such. Um, so what, I mean, we were talking about stories, we're talking about memories. What are some other things that inspire you in the work that you make?
So I'm like a really feely person. So I actually um, thrive when I am more in grief than than anything else, which is a really bizarre thing. But art helps me work through times of distress, and so um, that's actually a huge fuel for me personally. I know that during happy times or whatever times where there is much less stress, I still paint beautifully, but a lot of times what it is for me is a release of grief, and it's like really healthy mentally for me. So I can't even remember the question you asked. I went on a
Just what,
tangent.
no, it was that, just what was inspiring your
Yeah.
work. That's all.
Grief and suffering.
uh,
But in a really good way.
yeah. Well,
So
I mean, you talked about that notion of healing, and that it's not the grief and the suffering for grief and suffering's sake.
right.
It's that healing kind of process.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so when I enter the world, that joy that I know and love is there when I greet people instead of being bogged down with,
Yeah.
heavy weights. So yeah.
I think it's, um in Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
In her morning pages, she talks about the brain dump, and like, you kind of dump it
Mm-hmm.
out. And her idea is that you don't read those words because you're kind of just dumping out the stuff that gets in the way. So maybe like in your art, is it kind of like a heart dump? Are you dumping out this stuff that's weighing on you in your art?
That is a beautiful way to put it. That's exactly it. And I also do morning pages every day. So
Do you,
yes, I do.
the writer in you?
Exactly. But a lot of the things that come up in my morning pages, I realize that I need to deal with in a bigger way. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the heart dump. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, I find that I'm finding now in this time that I'm kind of going back to more of that, and I'm doing a lot of writing, and I'm trying to, I call it digging deep, trying to like
Yeah.
uncover. And I love that the fact that you use the word excavate a little bit earlier, because I have a painting behind me that it's part of a series called Excavate. And when you were talking about sort of that visceral feeling that you get when you fold origami, I just remember painting that series. And the reason it's called Excavate is that I just felt like I was sitting there excavating all this stuff, just letting my mind kind of churn as I was painting. And I feel like I haven't done that in a long time. So this time now when, oh, we got to stay at home, can't go anywhere, and
Yeah.
kind of forced to be introverted and with ourselves. um I find I'm going back to that.
Yeah. I've been mesmerized by that painting. I love that that's what it's a series of. That's really cool.
Yeah, it started out, I was doodling in my journal this kind of these shapes and stuff that were kind of going into the paper, and I was doing it for the longest time, I don't know, for a year or more. And it was one of those things that's like, well, why? What about this type of imagery? What about this thing do I find interesting? What is this? Why am I
Hmm.
drawn to this kind of thing? And then as I was painting and exploring, it was just like, oh, I'm excavating. I'm like trying to dig down into myself. I'm trying to connect with something in me. And this, and what's funny is like, I don't look at the paintings as sort of like, this is what I'm finding. I look at it as the paintings are the journey, because I was able to, it was the physical act of painting it that allowed my mind to sort of piece together ideas. And I never really thought about that until now. So it's kind of a interesting thing to kind of go back. That was a series I did like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So
So
excavating again.
one of my favorite people is Linda Berry,
Hmm.
the cartoonist, or I'm a writer. I don't like to put a label on her because she's just so much. But one thing she often says is, what is it about the hand in motion? And
Hmm.
there is something about I think that our body actually needs to release stuff. So what you excavating as part of the painting process, I think, is a perfect example of that. It's
Hmm.
like your hand is doing what it needs to do, just to release whatever is back there. Our subconscious is so full
Yeah.
of stuff. So
Yeah. She talks about like allowing things to show up, that you get your hand moving and you see what shows up.
yeah, yep.
So do you feel like you do a lot of that with your work? Like you just start making something and then ideas come, or do you have more of a specific idea before you start?
Uh, I would say more often the first, that I will start painting. When I do paint, especially when I'm not burning things and I'm actually painting, it's mostly abstract work, and so I just do what my hand wants to do. I let my hand move the way it wants to move, and I let my hand grab the color that it wants to paint with, and even last year, I found a symbol kept coming up in my work, and it was a ladder. And so I had
Hmm.
to excavate what that meant. And it was a really interesting part of my lineage and history. And so it went back to having to do with relationships with my grandmothers and going forward. And but I didn't know what it was when it showed up. And so yeah, I think it's but with the buffalo, see, it's the latter. It's the it's having this image that keeps repeating, and so I dig into it more, and so maybe push into it that way. But usually it's the letting my hand tell me what it wants to do, and other things come up like buffaloes.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that artists envision like the completed work, and that they sit down and they try to bring that vision, that mental image to life. And I think there are some artists, but most artists I know really are about the process. About the process will lead to something. It's I always call it a process of discovery.
Yes, yeah. I'm fascinated by artists that have that vision in mind, because I tried working that way and just was very frustrated by it. So it's like our brains work so differently. The way we
Hmm.
work in the world works so differently, and mine doesn't work that way. But I'm really fascinated by someone who does have the vision and is able to. This is what I wanted to create, and this is what I did. So it's a special gift, I think. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think there's probably, even in that process, in having I think there's a discovery process even in having the vision of the end product. Um, Although I don't know what that, I don't know if it's like just the discovery of, oh, when I did this, it worked
Hmm.
better this way, and I'll remember that for the future. But it's not like, oh, my grandma's showing up in my work.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I think that's the fun part for me as an artist, is sort of like, okay, this is coming up. Why is this? What is about this? And um, what do I want to say about it, or what is this thing kind of saying to me? Um,
Yeah. So what about you draw a lot of rectangles or box shapes. What is it about those?
I think it's. I was actually been thinking about this a lot lately, because I've been feeling boxed in, and I think that's been represented in the kind of the geometric, the rectangles, the squares, and I think it's it rectangles and squares are very structural, very
Hmm.
predictable, very stable. And especially over the last 4 years since I left teaching, my life has not been that stable. So I think intuitively and subconsciously, I've been drawn to that in my work, just to sort of like, okay, I need structure. I need this stability, because my life isn't quite as stable as I'd like it to be, maybe. And that's kind of like
Hmm.
where I've been thinking about it. And I've been using this time that I've been sort of hunkered down in my house to kind of explore notions of kind of releasing that, trying not to fall back. That's the other thing, is like just felt like, oh, I'm just falling back to these very comfortable things that are easy to do. I'm not pushing myself. And so I've been really feeling like I've been in a rut lately. And so I've been trying to kind of come out of that. So um, interesting that you bring that up, because that's a process I'm going through right now. How about you? Have you ever been in that thing where you felt like you were in a creative rut? And if you have, what did you do to sort of like work yourself out of it?
I definitely have. And I think that's when uh, I still had a lot of voices. For me, I was listening to other people tell me whether my work was valuable or not. So I was trying to create for other people. And so I actually took, with the sculptural properties of wax, I took a sharp tool and just started scratching through. And also another nice thing about wax is you can paint over. And so I actually got really chaotic and pretty messy with some of the paintings. And then ended up painting over the top of that this calm, peaceful landscape, sort of dreamscape. But it was breaking free of that process of thinking that I had to create in a certain way. And I know that's not what you're saying, but that's where I was stuck. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? It's like I'm trying to create something that you will find valuable,
Yeah.
and realizing that that didn't work for me.
Well, it's trying to trust your own voice,
Right. Yeah.
and that's a struggle, I think, for a lot of creative people,
Mm,
because they're, it's especially if you're trying to make a living with it, because you want, oh, I want my stuff to sell, I want to be able to do these things, but if no one's buying it, then you're kind of left scratching your head like, okay, well, what's going on here? And so I think it is
right.
tempting to kind of make stuff for other people instead of really making it for yourself.
Yeah. We're
So
making it because it just needs to be made.
mhm, yeah.
Yeah. And
And I think that's part of where I am now. It's like I'm trying to figure out, like, what what do I need to make, not thinking about, like you said, what am I making for other people. So that's
I
kind of
think
a
I think that's the hardest part for an artist. That's something that I've really been thinking about a lot, because we are making things that we do want to sell. We would like to sell our work. Um, and so we are looking to other people to purchase our work. But something that I'm really weary of is the art hustle.
hmm
It's like, putting the work out there and doing all this work to maybe hopefully sell a piece. And it's great when I do, and I love that. But it's like I just don't like that part of the art world. I really hate it. Or especially now, I see um, um, so many artists are struggling to stay afloat when so many people aren't working, and it's making it even more difficult.
yeah.
And so I love what you're doing with the workshop, the live workshop, the
hmm
online stuff is I think that is really life giving right now. But yeah, I personally am wanting to, I don't know, retreat from the traditional art world, just to get away from that
Yeah.
hustle.
Yeah. Well, and I think this time is very um, cathartic for people. I think it's really
Mm,
helping shine a light on what our priorities are,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I see some artists that are really like, okay, I'm taking this time to, like, hunker down in my studio, and I'll pop my head
Hmm.
up every so often, but I'm taking this time for myself. But then I see other artists that are really scrambling and trying to figure out, like, okay, I need to eat, I need to pay my bills,
Right.
and
It's necessary. It's
yeah,
all necessary. Yeah. So finding
and
that balance is really hard.
yeah, and so for me, whenever the stay-at-home order was ordered here in Virginia, and all of a sudden all my classes and workshops were getting canceled, I was just like, okay, I started freaking out at first, but then I kind of calmed down and said, all right, well, I'm good for a little while. Let me just start kind of reaching out and putting stuff out
Hmm.
there. And I did turn on to more online stuff, but not, I didn't want to be like, oh, hey, come buy my art. Oh, come take a workshop with me. Because everyone was kind of freaking out at that time. I think now people are settling into the routine.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so, yeah, the online stuff is definitely, I mean, even this, I mean, I've had this podcast now for over a year. And one of my goals was to interview other artists. But
Hmm.
I haven't done that so much because what I was finding was like, oh, I interviewed a few of my friends because I used to do the podcast out in my garage where I don't have Wi-Fi. And
Ah, yeah.
so I had to have a person with me in the studio, or, go to their house and or meet with them somewhere where we could be in the same location and do an interview. And then as soon as this this situation hit, I was like, oh, I'll move at least a little bit of my studio into the house so that I can connect to the Wi-Fi. And so then I was like, oh, well, I can start doing stuff online. I can do, like, live streaming and do online classes, but oh, I can also start interviewing artists. So to me, this was a real opportunity to connect with other people, which is really strange in a time when you're not allowed to go out, go and gather and meet and that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
it's a very strange time.
Yeah. Yeah. Meet with people across the country.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
I've had actually with my online workshop, I have somebody from Denmark that signed up and somebody from England, and so
Awesome.
it's really cool to be able to connect with people. And a lot of these were people that I've seen a lot on social media, and it was finally nice to be able to be like, oh, okay, now I can put a face with the name. So
Right.
very, very cool to kind of do that. Um, so have you been making a lot, well, I don't want to say making a lot of work, but have you turned to your studio and making in this time, or is this a time where you've kind of stepped back? How are you dealing with this whole situation? Is kind of, I guess, is how I'm what I'm
I
asking.
found it depends on the day. Some days I'm in the studio all day, and other days it's I've been reading a lot more than I'd normally do. So I've just found that maybe I just need to shut down that way.
Hmm.
And so but having that realization that I do need space in between my work, it's been really nice. I haven't been beating myself up about not being in the studio every day when I had nothing else to do.
Hmm.
So so but it has been wonderful to be in there on the days that I'm there, and it's been really satisfying. Yeah, I'm just letting it go by how I feel when I wake up
Hmm.
each day, because I can right now, and it's kind of a really nice break from the usual pattern of the schedule of a week or whatever it might look like. So
Hmm. Yeah, I think that ebb and flow. I know I've talked about this with a lot of my artist friends, is that there's an ebb and a flow to things. And
hmm
there's a podcast that I listen to called the Creative Pep Talk. And on it, the guy, he calls himself Andy J. Pizza. His last name is really Miller, but he likes pizza, so he calls himself Andy J. Pizza. I don't know if you're familiar with that podcast, but he talks about like everything having a season, and that we have to recognize those seasons. There are those seasons where we are going to be fully immersed in our art. There are going to be seasons where we have to kind of step back. Um, and the same thing with uh, sometimes there's going to be times when, we're doing a lot of workshops or we're selling a lot of work. Other times where those things aren't going to be so much, and just trying to recognize that ebb and flow. And I've always liked those terms. Um,
yes, I'm finding that during this pandemic time, it's a different season every day. So
yeah. Well,
today I woke up to spring, so I'm glad about that.
yeah, it was very rainy here yesterday, and I just went outside to get the mail, and I'm just like, I'm tired of the rain. It seems like it's been raining so much,
Yeah.
and then today it's nice and sunny. So um, yeah, different season. So we're talking about seasons and ebbing and flowing. Um,
But with the pandemic with the pandemics, oh my gosh, with the pandemic, seriously, some days I wake up and in winter I really feel like hibernating, um, and it does feel like winter some days when I wake up. I just want to hibernate, and I think it's just like I find that the less I look at Facebook or the news or
mm,
anything like that, the more it feels like spring and summer. But some days I just it's winter again, no matter what it's like outside, and I don't want to go in the studio. I don't want to do anything. It's so I have appreciated being able to take the time now just to acknowledge that's how I feel that day and just let it be
mm.
without pushing myself or having to be somewhere feeling that way. So, but yay for spring today.
So you have an awesome studio space. You just have to walk downstairs and you're in your studio. I really enjoyed the weekend there that I taught. It's a huge open space. Um, what do you have any kind of rituals that help you kind of get into the art making or into creating? Is there anything that you do special, or do you just like go down and jump in when you feel like it?
I do have sort of a ritual, and in painting, painting with wax, I have to turn on my palettes and heat the wax up. So there is some time there if I'm not just burning candles, to heat things up. So uh, when I enter my studio, I immediately go turn things on, and then I often write, or if I've already journaled that day, I will start tidying, and like tidying, just putting things away here and there, just kind of clearing space uh, to make way for whatever's coming. And then I don't know, it is a big space, so I find myself walking around it,
Hmm.
and not like in a systematic way, but just like, what pieces are speaking to me today, and what colors are speaking to me today. And um, sometimes I will fold paper before my hot wax is ready to paint with. And yeah, it's kind of just entering, it's like entering a sacred space to me. Um, and if sometimes Scott, my husband, like he has his own part of our building, and sometimes he's playing music really loud, or I hear Star Trek episodes going on the other side, and so I have to put in my headphones. I find I really like to paint when I'm listening to music,
Hmm.
and so I'll put on whatever is calling to me that day and listen to that and get in a groove. I burn a lot of incense, and so incense is usually going at the very beginning of my process, just as part of me getting into my headspace and letting
Hmm.
the rest of my duties of life go, so I can be fully present with my work.
There's the burning again.
Yeah, I know. It's a theme.
So when you're working, I mean, your studio space is pretty huge,
Yep.
and so do you find that you have like lots of different things going on? And because you're talking about like walking around and like things speaking to you, is that kind of how you work? You have lots of different things, or do you have a one or two things going on? What's your process like?
Uh, I have a lot of things out. I'm probably actively working on probably uh, 5 or 6 things at a time. I have a lot more out on tables just to see if something calls to me. I have so the series where I'm actually burning stuff and using those candles, and just lighting things on fire. I've made it a purpose to only use panels that I want to reclaim. Like
Mhm.
I've decided I don't even like that work anymore. I'm not even going to try to sell that painting. And so I've been burning on top of old work. So it's like, which work wants to be released today,
Mm.
almost sort of in the process. But I also love little bits of old paper. And so I don't know how it happens, but they end up all over my studio. And I don't know. I have a lot of old books, and I'll just get things out. Um, Crystal Marie Neubauer has been doing a wonderful online collage workshop, and so a lot of my papers were out working on collage with her with that, and just finding bits and stuff, and uh, a lot of those bits end up in my work. Just like I'm attracted to the shape of you, the color of you, the age of you. Maybe there's a word on a piece of paper, and it may never get seen in my work, but there's something about the process of collecting those little bits, and and sometimes I don't even use them in my work, but it's like a little pile of treasure right beside the space where I'm working. So a lot of that happens too. Kind of
Yeah.
like a magpie collecting shiny things, and so it's like I'm bringing
but,
them
it-
in and
but
seeing
it's just
what works
old
in the magic.
paper, huh?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, that's cool. I always love hearing about artist process because we're all so different. But then it's also interesting to hear about how sometimes we do things in similar ways, or I think a lot of people just have this idea, and I think it comes from education, like in school. Like you have a project, you work on this thing from start to finish, and then you move on to something else. And I don't know many artists that work that way. um, I,
Right.
I think most artists usually have lots of different things going on, things that they've started that have stalled out, things that are just kind of sitting there waiting for some spark of inspiration. um, and that's a myth that I keep wanting to try to dispel with people. It's like artists tend to have like, tons of stuff started and are probably working on lots of different things at a single time. um,
Yes. And I think that's really good too, because if I find that I get really stuck on one piece, I just move to the next thing,
mhm.
and then I can come back to the other one after I've worked on a few other things for a while, and it looks completely different to me. So I'm able to approach it and know what to do next.
So you mentioned your husband Scott. Like you said, he's a great guy. I loved hanging out with you and your family. Um, your family's pretty creative. I mean,
Hmm.
you got your husband who, well, you and your husband own a video production company. Your son works with him,
Hmm.
but your son's also a writer.
Yeah, he just released his fourth novel, and they're all available on Amazon. Pretty amazing. I and they're great. They're great. So yeah, and my
Awesome.
daughter's a chef, and she's also a visual artist, but like the career that she has pursued has been in the food world. So yeah.
Do you do you think? I mean, you were talking about like when you first got started getting into art that your kids were young. Do you think
Hmm.
that helped them kind of say to themselves like, "Hey, it's okay to be like explore these creative fields"?
I think so, and also with the work that Scott does in the like I'm his accountant. That's where I still use my accounting. I'm glad I have that skill. But when he is working, his jobs are whenever the jobs are. It's like he doesn't have a traditional work week or a
Hmm.
traditional work day or hours or whatever. And so I think even seeing that lifestyle and having my now adult children grow up in a home that was entrepreneurial and or the way it was based, has given them the thinking that they can, like, what do I want to do and how would I go about doing that? So when I know one of the reasons that my son does work in the video production world is so that he can actually make money as he develops his writing. So his hope is one day just to be writing,
Hmm.
but until that point, he has this other creative work that he can do. So
Oh, good, good. Um, let's see. Trying to. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, I just went blank. I was like listening to you, and then it's like, oh, can't think of. I should have had a list of questions. uh, oh, I want to get back to inspiration, because I always feel like people wait for inspiration, especially if they don't understand creativity. Um, I love this quote by Chuck Close, and he says that inspiration is for amateurs, and that the rest of us just show up and get to work, and that by getting to work, those ideas kind of start to come and develop. And I always say tell people like inspiration is like waiting for lightning to strike. That
right.
you have to set up the right conditions in order for lightning to strike. If you want to get struck by lightning, number one, it's got to be stormy. Lightning has to be like flashing around, and you want to go stand like on your roof with a very tall metal pole, and then hopefully you'll get struck by lightning. And I feel like that's like inspiration, is that you have to set up the circumstances, and we do that by going to the studio or sitting down and writing or working in a journal. Um and so I think there's a lot of misconceptions around that notion of inspiration. um
I agree. Yeah, totally. I think
and
it's more a matter of noticing. I think uh, there is a certain way of perceiving the world or noticing things in the world that make our brain spin, and we need to pay attention to those things. It's not waiting for an inspirational idea so we can go make that idea happen. It's like responding to life every day, and like the shadow on the paper. Like, I love shadows, so I watch shadows everywhere I go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really inspired by shape of shadow and things like that. Another thing is, because I have horrible vision, I'm terribly myopic. I love getting really, really close to flowers and, taking photos of
Mm-hmm.
flowers really close up. Things like that. It's like, if I look that far into the flower, I see things that I never would have seen before. And that perception, then, like, I think that way of thinking, I think, carries into, I'm not waiting for something to inspire me. I'm looking for beautiful things everywhere I go, and how I'm not looking at objects necessarily, but shapes and shadows and light and dark and things like that. So those ideas are just filled in my head, and they have to come out, but it's not like, yeah, if I waited for an inspirational idea, 2 times a year.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the issues, that when a lot of people are starting out in whatever creative field, that they are waiting for like inspiration to strike, and people just, you end up sitting around a whole lot. And if you just start doing something, then
Yes.
ideas start to flow. And I like how you described it as noticing something and then responding.
Yeah.
It's,
And also, going back to Linda Berry's thing with the hand in motion, I think that our body already has something to say, and we just need to let our
mm-hmm.
hands move and actually do whatever they want to do to create something. Yeah.
So, speaking of inspiration and noticing things, I noticed that some of your recent work looks like it's been inspired by family members. So you did a series of paintings based on a drawing that your grandson had done.
Yes. Yeah. So somebody handed me the drawing from Noah, so I didn't get it directly from him. And he's 3 years old. And so then I went on a retreat with a few friends of mine. We met and spent a week together in an Airbnb, and went to one of the gal's studio every day and just created. And I used that little piece of paper as inspiration. And I saw it as this beautiful little vessel. So I was painting a vessel, and then I turned it over and I thought, well, maybe it's a cave. And so just, using my imagination to all the things that it could be. And later, when I asked him about it after I had created all these paintings, he said, it's a square. I said, you need to draw me some more shapes. I need some more shapes, because it was really wonderful just letting my imagination go as to, what he had been thinking about when he drew his square. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And then you were getting some inspiration from your grandfather.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things I burned, I happened to have some wheat left from my grandpa's last wheat crop. He died in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And I had wheat from that, and just recently threw it in with the prayer candles and lit it on fire. And that was so powerful to me. So yeah, there's a lot of story in that personal story that I probably shouldn't share here on this podcast, but it was a huge releasing
Mm-hmm.
of I don't know, just a lot of family stuff, family crap that builds up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty cathartic. But just the fact that I had that wheat that was that old, and that it was actually tied to my grandpa's last crop that he put in the ground. And and harvested was,
Mm.
I don't know, it was pretty amazing.
I like that.
And it smelled like bread when I lit it on fire.
Just that idea of releasing stories. I think that's that's a good phrase, releasing stories. Yeah, it's like I said, stories has been coming up. That word, that notion has been coming up
Mm-hmm.
so much with me lately. So it's good to hear that other people use that, that's important to them as well. So I'm starting to run out of some questions. So I'm going to wrap it up. But what I'd like, this is Artistic Accomplices, and the idea is that I think people get inspiration from hearing the stories of other artists and hearing their journey, and hearing about how they come up with ideas. But we're in this really unprecedented time now, and I think there are people that are struggling. There are people that maybe are using this time to create and kind of get in touch with that part of themselves. So
Mm-hmm.
do you have any kind of advice or words of wisdom to share with anybody, just that just that might help them in their kind of journey and in their creating?
Yeah, so I really think that our brains do work very differently. Like, so my process is going to be my process, but my advice to everyone would be, what is it that you want to do? Like, what are you drawn to? What are the things that you love? Is there a certain color? Is there a shape? I love geometry and, the shadow that I've been talking about. And some, and I'm an abstract painter, but some people love the realism. It's like, what are you drawn to? And for those that like me, that don't have an art background, that may be just starting out, one thing that I did when I couldn't draw, and I wanted to tell a story in my work, is used a lot of collage shapes cut out of things and glued down. And so it doesn't have to be fine art to be amazing work. And it can be amazing work just for you, and that's plenty. And just the process of keep doing it and keep coming back and listening to that inner voice, I think, is really important.
Well, awesome. I think that's awesome advice. So I appreciate you being here with me today and taking time out, and it's good to talk with you again after a couple of years. Is there
I wish
any
we could play Farkle, actually. If we could play Farkle, this would be great. It's wonderful to see your face, but I missed the dice rolling here.
Well, there might be a way to do virtual Farkle. I don't know. For anybody that's listening that's wondering what the heck is Farkle, it's a dice game that you can look it up online, but I learned it years and years ago, and it's just
And
something.
I learned it from Eric, and it's a blast.
Yeah, yeah, and a good friend of both of ours, Erin, who kind of introduced us. We made a connection with her because of she knew what Farkle was. She grew up with her grandparents playing it, and so Farkle is it's a dice game, but it's a fun. There's all kind of different variations, and some of them are hysterical, and some of them are fun, and well, they're all fun. But anyway, so that's what Farkle is. So is there anything else that you'd like to say, or anything else that we didn't touch on?
I think we touched on everything. The big lesson that I've learned in the pandemic has been, and I think I've said this in different forms. We all think differently, but we all have a different pace, and we all have different things that we need to create, and you need to do what's inside of you, and not worry about what other people believe makes you successful or not as an artist. So Yeah.
Listening to your own voice and not the voices of all those other people. So,
Exactly.
all right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Oh, you're welcome.